Hi, happy International Romani Days. So my name is Angéla Kóczé. I'm the Assistant Professor of Romani Studies, also Chair of Romani Studies and Academic Director of the Roma Graduate Preparation Program. And I would like to welcome to our event, which is a 3 days event series on this International Romani Day. And today, actually, the Romani Studies Program, as well as the Romani Students Association of CEU, will present their short films, as well as they will reflect on the legacy and relevance of the first World Romani Congress. And I would like to give the floor to Nadja to talk a little bit about the 2 days program. And thank you so much that you are here. And also I'm really grateful for our students to making this fantastic program. Thank you.
Thank you, Angéla, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I am Nadja Greku, international relations student at the Central European University, and also one of the founders of the CEU Roma Students Association. So first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to all of the students, my incredible fellow students at CEU and BARD, MA students, Roma Graduate Preparatory Program students, and other students who have designed today's exciting program. I'm also very grateful to you, Angéla, as well as to Marton and the whole Romani Studies department for supporting us throughout this creative process. In the past couple of weeks, we went through a true collective journey for the students of CEU and BARD Berlin. And this collective journey actually showed how important and is the also network. And it showed the true impact that this kind of a network has on us as students and the wider society and activism. We have jointly embarked on this path of learning and unlearning about Roma history. This project also enabled further cooperation among the students, but it also provided us with an opportunity to learn more about the legacies of the first Roman Congress, and it enabled us to reflect on our own activism. We hope that today's program will open space for reflecting and on both the achievements of the Congress, but also reflecting on our own activism, on our own models of leadership, and that it will help us find new ways of knowing and narrating Roma history. So I invite my colleague Francesca Nicolodi from BARD to share her welcome thoughts with us.
Hello everyone, welcome. I'm happy that you're all here today. My name is Francesca and I'm a student of BARD College Berlin, majoring in ethics and politics, and I was part of the student group organizing this amazing event. And I would like to tell you a bit more how I was able to do this. It was thanks to the Open Society Foundation, which gave me the chance to attend the Romani Studies program at CEU. And through the courses, I was able to meet other Roma students that welcomed me with big arms and enabled me to join the CEU Roma Students Association. So today I'm glad to present you our event that we worked so hard to create in order to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first Roma Congress together. So I hope you will enjoy it, and a big thank you to all of you who participated in the making. You should be really proud of yourself. So now Nadja will let you know a bit more about this event.
Thank you, Francesca. So first we will do a bit of screening of the 3 short videos produced by the students at CU and BARD. The videos are related to the legacies and the 3 key symbols which came from the First World Roma Congress. So the first video will address the Roma nation. The second one will address the Romani flag. And the third one is about the Romani anthem, Jelem Jelem. Then we will move to an exciting project which we have. It is the screening of our interview with Grattan Puxon, one of the key organizers of the First Roma Congress. That will be followed by a round table on Romani history, but also self-determination and digital technologies. And here we have some amazing speakers ready to share their insights with us. And finally, we will launch the online platform, which has the purpose of collecting personal testimonies and artworks related to the Roma community and Roma oral history. So given that we have a busy program in front of us, we can start with a screening.
Roma are blessed with belonging to a nation that goes beyond borders, because our dream went beyond. Today, each of us Roma are the kinship and the solidarity of our nation. Before this could happen, we had to endure the death of over 500,000 in a forgotten Holocaust, which we call Samadurapin, who have been racialized, persecuted, and marginalized. Our dream was to come together as one, to unite against our sufferings, to live peacefully in spite of continual oppression. Now I smile and open my arms to the world, because we are a nation.
Man sagt, wo Rauch ist, ist auch Feuer, und dein Flackern ist der lebende Beweis ist.
When Roma leaders met in 1971, designing the Roma flag was one of their priority tasks. In a time when flags helped gain recognition as a nation in a world increasingly composed of nation-states, this made sense. The purpose of a flag, any flag, is to tell our collective history by evoking emotions. Each time I see the Roma flag at an event, on the internet, or simply hanging from a window, I feel warm inside, because the person who owns that flag is just like me, someone who seeks those little moments of belonging. As funny as it may sound, I felt proud when Tyson Fury wore my flag on his shorts. It is in moments like that I'm reminded that I belong to a nation. To me, the blue on our flag is an ode to everlasting hope in a better tomorrow, and the green reminds us to stand firmly on the ground and recognize our bond with Mother Nature. The wheel is a hint of our connectedness to India, and a reminder that our ancestors were often on the move, searching for a place at which they will feel welcome, a place they could call home.
I remember the first time I heard our national anthem. The lyrics and music written by Žarko Jovanović touched me profoundly. Each tone of the accordion brings untold story of Samudari pen, and the fear nested within my inner being comes alive. Yet, at the same time, our anthem invokes feelings of resilience, pride, and joy in me. Our anthem is engraved with both pain and joy. Dželem Dželem celebrates the integration of all aspects of life as a path toward liberation of the community and the individual. It is powerful. It melts your heart before giving it life. It teaches you that at the ashes of your great hopelessness lies the great opportunity and lies the greatest strength of your heart. And it also says that you have a new opportunity to love beyond the pain.
Welcome everyone, I am Nadja Greku, International Relations student at the Central European University, and it is a pleasure to be here with you today. We at the Roma Students Association have been wanting for a while now to have this conversation with Mr. Puxon, and given that this year we mark 50 years since the first Roma Nation Congress, it made sense to do this interview at this moment. The first Roma Nation Congress has a particular importance for the Romani community, given that at that Congress, Roma claimed their right to have rights. They have proclaimed themselves to be a nation by introducing a Romani anthem, Dželem Dželem, by designing the Romani flag, and also by refusing to be named by others through racial slurs and insisting that the word Roma is used when referring to Roma. So today we will learn about the first Roma Nation Congress, who organized it, why, who supported it, who objected it, and also what is the legacy behind it, how can we contribute to preserving the legacy of the first Roma Nation Congress. Joining us today, Mr. Grattan Puxon, who is a prominent activist, very well known for his diligent work, but also for his compassion and solidarity with Roma. Also with us is Michal Mižigar, or Miju as we know him. He is a prominent activist, Roma activist from Czech Republic. He's currently finalizing his studies in comparative history at CEU, and he's known as an educator as well. We also have Maria Atanasova from Bulgaria. She has recently been awarded with the Young European Award for 2020, and she's finalizing her studies at the Romani Studies preparatory program for Roma at the CEU. And with us is also Serjan Baftiari. He's a prominent Roma activist from Montenegro, known also across the Western Balkans for his journalist work and activism. So, welcome, Mr. Puxon, and maybe we could start by you giving us a little bit of background on how you actually met the Roma for the first time and how you were escaping the military drafting and the violence of the state and moving in your 20s to Ireland, meeting the Roma, and how this story of solidarity and compassion started when you were a young man.
My father was a lawyer, and I was fortunate to travel quite a bit as a child. And one of the places I went to was Yugoslavia, right back in 1952. And I was all over the Balkans. I went back to Yugoslavia when I was 15. And then it came up to being in school and getting out of school like everybody else. And then what changed my life, having signed up to be a journalist, a young journalist on a local paper, was getting my call-up papers, because at that time military service was compulsory. So I thought about how to get out of this military service, and I thought to myself, well, I have relations in Ireland, people I don't know, but people who are back in my family. My grandmother and grandfather came from County Wexford in Ireland, and so I tore up my paper and went on the run from the British Army and went over to Ireland. And it was a matter of survival that I moved in with the travelers. I got myself a caravan, a pony, and I started, living as a traveler. My connections with the travelers are this way and that. I don't know. I have Collinses and so on, people who may have been travelers in my own family. It was tough. And it was all, as I say, survival. I had no idea of being an activist, being anything like, a supporter of a campaign. But a couple of things opened my eyes to what was going on, because I was in my wagon one morning and a big burly man came up. He was a man we called Big Bill. His background was through the Spanish Civil War. He had been on the Franco side in the Spanish Civil War and was now the chief bailiff of Dublin Corporation. And his job was to move on travelers like me. And he banged on my wagon. He said, you've got to be off here in 1 week or you're going to get something or other. Something bad's going to happen to you. I don't know what. Take you to court, I suppose. So myself and some other travelers who were just down in the street there, they were in a tent, one of these old, what we call bender tents. And we moved up together to a place called the Ring Road. And unknown to me, there'd been a very big eviction just a couple of months before from a place called picturesquely, the California Hills, where there are about 20 wagons, I think up there. And they'd all moved down to this piece of factory land near the Grand Canal. This is in the west side of Dublin. And they told me things were pretty bad. They'd been moved on. Could we make a stand here? Could we do something that might at least deter Dublin Corporation from moving in again, led by Big Bill and the police, the Garda, as they call them in Ireland? So the idea was to build a school. And myself and some other young men, we went off round the corner to a scrapyard owned by travelers. And they fortunately had some school desks, amazingly. They had some school desks, they had bits and pieces, they had a big frame, a door, and we built a school, just a kind of a shack school. And this seemed great. And this was around the Christmas of 1962. And we started school. A couple of students came up from the university, people like yourself. And 1 week later at dawn, suddenly we realized they had come for us and they were going to evict us. And we started school. All the children packed into the school, people like yourself. And we sung a couple of rebel songs and we said, we will resist. You know, if you're going to pull this school down, it will have to come down on top of us. They put a chain around it. They started to pull it down. We had to come out. And we negotiated to leave. I said, we will leave by 2 o'clock. So we all lined up outside with our wagons. There were about 18 wagons on the road. And we started off down the road. And when I look back, that school was on fire. And I can tell you that those flames is what set my mind, my heart going, and my feelings. I knew that I had we had to fight back. It was going to be a fight back situation from now on. That's what kind of got me involved as an activist. After that, we were evicted from about 10 places around Dublin. And then finally, we pulled into a huge field opposite the Cherry Orchard Beaver Hospital. It was a huge piece of land, about, I would think it was about 26 acres of land. And we went in there, and eventually a lot of travelers came from different sides of Ireland until there were 400 of us. We built another school. We barricaded it, and we said, this is where we make our stand. Now, there was nothing really much about human rights, but there had been a commission by an Irish judge and a report saying travelers should get better treated. But their idea of better treated, listen to this, their idea of better treated was, if you will give up your wagon for burning, we will give you a council house. So in other words, if you're prepared to give up your traveling way of life and be integrated, was a very dirty word, then, and a couple of people did. But the most of us hung out in Cherry Orchard for two or 3 years. We were on that piece of land until one day we looked at the school, and there was a whole battalion of police out on the road, a whole battalion of police, guardas they call them. And down the road was a lot of buses full of workmen who were coming up ready to act with Big Bill and to be led into our camp. So by then being the spokesman, I had to cross the road and face the main chief, Hodja, the main piece, the big policeman, you know. And I said to him, look, if you come in this camp, look at the people at the fence, and they're all lined up there with sticks and bars and ready to fight. So it looked, this was a bit of a bluff because we were afraid. But I said, if you come into this camp, there's going to be bloodshed. So there was a dead silence. We all stood there, and they conferred together. We talked among ourselves a little bit. And the next we knew, they had all swung around and were marching away down the street, and we had won. So a couple of milk bottles were hurled on the road. A couple of sticks went over. A few stones were thrown. It was the end of the thing. And the whole issue went into court, and it was argued in court that due to this commission on itinerancy, something had to be done for the travelers at Cherry Orchard. And out of that stand, the very first caravan park was provided, a place called Labra Park. And in the meanwhile, I'd been visited from France, first by Vejza Voivod. I don't know if that's name familiar to Jon Rotaru, his name was. He came out of Bessarabia at the end of the war. He'd lost a lot of families in the Holocaust. He got to Paris and started an organization, Communauté Mondiale Gitane. He came over to me in Cherry Orchard, 1964, and had great discussions around the campfire for about 3 days. We were there. He was there. And he said, would I return in a conscious effort to organize travelers in England? Now, I was in a difficult position because I knew that, you know, I was on the run from the army. And if I went back to England, I would be arrested for that. But fortunately, when I got back to England, not to have this story go on too long, when I got back, there'd been an amnesty, so I was not picked up by the military police, although they had been to my house looking for me. And in 1966, I was able to form the Gypsy Council. And we did this in a pub, which I picked out specially because the pub on the door said no gypsies. In other words, no gypsies served in this pub. There we go. That's how it all started. Between 1966 and up to the First World Romani Congress, there were a lot of battles all around England because we had one simple law of action. Our law of action was stop evictions. Wherever a local council is going to come out with their bailiffs, with the police, we are going to stand our ground and we're going to fight back. And that was pretty successful. There was some very, very successful travelers and very militant travelers who were able to do that. I remember Tommy Doherty, who started his own campaign back in 1959. He brought 100 caravans onto one piece of land. Now, no small authority could deal with such big numbers. And then we had the Battle of Brown Hills, where they pulled 40 caravans out onto the road, including mine, without the wheels on. And we said, okay, you put our caravans on the road, so. And the chief of police says, look, you're blocking the road. You're blocking the road, man. You've got to get off the road. I said, we're not getting off. We didn't allow our caravans to be pulled out there. This was done by force. You have forced us out onto this road. And eventually, by a lot of argument, they agreed on this. And the council came back with their tractors and pulled us back onto that piece of land again. So we learned a lot of things this way. We learned there were tactics, there were ways of resisting that could be effective. And we were so effective that eventually the government called us in, that was the Ministry of Housing, to talk to us. And there'd been a law passed, the 1966 Caravan Site Act, which was enacted actually in 1968, which made it an obligation on every council and every town around England to provide a caravan site for travellers.
That's really one of the things that we would also like other people listening to this is to understand how important it is to actually be in contact with Roma when you are an activist or when you are working on policies related to Roma. That's why we are very grateful to have you today, because you're someone who actually became an activist through true activism, being on the streets, living with Roma and understanding the struggles of Roma. Miju, I think that you might start with the questions related to the Congress itself, now that we have a little bit of context and background about Mr. Puxon.
You know, I'm really amazed. I consider it like a miracle in the history of Roma, when Roma left India, and after all the enslavement and also persecutions like throughout all the centuries, the Congress in 1971 is like light in the history of Roma, like some hope, how it looked like and which the activities were running during the Congress, if you can share with us.
Yes, well, as I mentioned, I was fortunate to do quite a bit of traveling. And in 1968, I was, for instance, in the Czech Republic. No, it was not Czech Republic, it was Czechoslovakia. And I met with Dr. Jansi Bula, who in fact became second president of the World Romani Congress. And there was a lot of talk already going on in Paris. There'd been meetings in Paris with both with Veiza Voivod, who was then replaced by Vankarudo. I don't know if that's the name also you know about Vankarudo. Discussions about a Congress, the need for a Congress. Even Breiter had said this in Ireland, like in 1964. But nothing moved. Everything seemed to be a little bit stuck. And there was a very ambitious idea of having a Congress at the Palais de UNESCO in Paris, which had been very grand, very impressive, but we couldn't have it. So back in London, and talking to my friends on the Gypsy Council, we decided, look, let's give this a bit of a jump and let's have the Congress in London, or at least let's have a big gathering of people and discuss how a Congress can be held. And this is really how the 1971 came about, the 1971 Congress came about, with the idea of coming together, trying to, well, we succeeded in breaking the Iron Curtain, having people come from Eastern Europe and from Western Europe come together. There were at that time only about 12 organizations in the whole of Europe. And I think that at least 10 of them were represented. And perhaps we missed out the Zigeuner Mission, which was in Germany at the time, and a Pan-Hellenic Roma organization in Greece, which I learned about later when I was living in Greece. So various groups of people were able to come. They got to London, and we sat together in this building, which you see here. And it was a great gift having that building, because it just happened that a traveler called called Brian Raywood was working there as a cook. And Mr. Baker, who owned the school, he let us have it. It was a holiday time. He said, you can have it. You can use the library. You can sleep in our beds, which were bunk beds, you like boys have in residential schools. And so we sat around on that library on the 8th of April, 1971, and we said, what shall we, what is this? Is this a preparatory meeting to plan a Congress, or shall we have the Congress now? And of course, everybody said, let's have the Congress. There was no doubt about that. So it became the First World Romani Congress. And of course, one of the things that the Congress did was to declare that 8th of April should always be remembered and celebrated as Roma Nation Day. And I get disappointed nowadays because you hear all kinds of different names put to that day. You hear it being called the International Roma Day. But what's international about it when we are one nation and made that particular Congress for the purpose of establishing the Roma nation?
I can imagine to organize like a Congress with the participation of delegations from Eastern Europe. At that time, when Europe was divided like by Iron Curtain, how did you communicate with the people? And if you had some like the moral or financial like the support for this, who was like the partner for you?
Well, the Gypsy Council hosted it, and I, as General Secretary of the Gypsy Council, had to do a lot of corresponding. And in those days, you had to send up a letter. You had to wait 2 weeks to get back. It's not like 2 seconds and you get an answer back with the fantastic technology you have today. So it was slowly built together. Yugoslavia played a large part, I suppose, in a way that there was a more liberal regime, if you believe that. I later on lived in Yugoslavia after the Congress, and I found was for and against being a Rom in Yugoslavia. But a group came from Yugoslavia, a very important group, headed by Slobodan Berberski, who was our first president. And he famously said, we cannot, when he went back afterwards, I think this is a good point to make, when he went back to Belgrade afterwards and wrote his official report, together with Faik Abdi, who was the first Rom elected to the Macedonian parliament, he wrote in his report, we did not have on our agenda discussion about Romanistan, but I have to say that in all our hearts, that feeling was there that the Roma must somehow come together, and that every place where a Roma lives, every place we are, is a little part of Romanistan. And I think nowadays it's quite clear that we now have a virtual Romanistan, and what we are doing today is part of that virtual Romanistan. So that's how the Congress came to an end in a very happy atmosphere, in a very militant atmosphere too, because the other thing that we did was to adopt a flag, which before the First World War, before the Holocaust, and before all the terrible events of the Holocaust, it had simply been a plain flag, blue at the top, green at the bottom, and had been raised, as far as we know, at least back to 1934 in a Congress in Bucharest. 1934 being the very year that the Nazi Party came to power in Germany. So onto that flag was embossed this beautiful wheel, and it came about because somebody from the Indian Embassy in London, Mr. W.R. Rishi, now he came as a private person. He didn't come because the embassy sent him there. And in fact, we didn't have any help really from India at that time. But Mr. Rishi came and he said, look, let's make it quite clear to the world that even though today Roma have no state, there is in your background and heritage the state of India. And India, of course, had become the biggest democratic republic in the world. And we were very proud and glad to have that connection by having the wheel on the flag, which was very similar to the Ashok chakra on the national flag of India. So that's how that came about. And the anthem, you want to know something about Jelem Jelem? We took a bus up to Birmingham because in a town just outside Birmingham, Walsall, 3 children had been burned to death in a caravan in the circumstances that their caravans had all been pulled out onto a place, George Street, and one of them had caught fire. So it wasn't a deliberate act of arson, but it was an accident that had come out of the fact of being evicted and not being left alone where we said we should be left alone. And we took this bus up to Birmingham, and Thomas Holomek came and led us in a protest at the local police station. He stormed in there, he was quite angry, we're all angry. And on the way back to London, Žako Jovanović wrote the new lyrics for Jelem Jelem. And one of the lines he put in there was about Ikali Legia, that the Black Legion had killed our family in the war, in the Holocaust. So that's how the Jelem Jelem came about. We stood around that fire, in memory of those 3 children, and sung it for the first time to the words that Žako had just been writing.
I would like to ask you, what were also as well the other goals or the mission of the first World Roma Congress?
Yes, we were very ambitious, and I'd just like to put in also Anton Fatsuna, a partisan hero. I'm sure you know about him, and I suppose he was also one of the inspirations. He couldn't come. He was from Bratislava, and he could not come to the Congress. But I don't know if you heard that, but he worked on and wrote the first constitution for the World Romani Congress, although in effect it wasn't a very good one because it seemed to be too much on the communist sort of centralized level. And this is exactly what we're doing today in the Jubilee Congress, is to have an open Congress with everybody participating and more democracy and more openness and transparency. Yes, we were very ambitious, and we set up a number of commissions. For instance, there was the War Crimes Commission, and it couldn't, to be honest, do much, except we did start to collect together the first real statements and so on about the Holocaust, and it enabled me to write the book in 1972, that was the following year, which was Destiny of Europe's Gypsies, which was the first statement and bringing together of statistics and so on about the Holocaust. It has been much improved on since then, and many other people have contributed to the history of the Holocaust since then, but it was the first statement. And it was hoped, you see, at the time that Germany, West Germany as it was, would pay a block reparations to the Romani people, as had been done to Israel. And it was the hope by the Voivod, on the planks of his campaign, to have India act as trustees for such reparations, and that was making at least one step nearer the possibility of the foundation of a state, though nobody could tell us where it might be. At least we've had the ability to ask for such a thing and work towards it. So we've got virtual Romanistan, but not real earth that you can pick up in your hand. So that was one part of it. We had a social commission that was headed by Faik Abdi. And when later I went to live in Shutka, we had a great number of talks about what the social commission might do. And he had founded by then the Party for the Full Emancipation of the Romani people. And together, we wanted very ambitiously to have the party for the emancipation of Roma, to be a whole European-wide party. But of course, there are all kinds of restrictions at that time. This was just in the early 1970s. So that was never realized, but it might be realized today. And there are people I know in Serbia today who want to organize at the community level and have a party which would have its own party democracy, that would have an election of representatives and so on, in the way any party might do, but to be European-wide. So that was another thing. We had, of course, a lot of hopes about education. I had a lot of strong feelings about education, having built the 2 schools in Ireland. And it was hoped that we would start promoting Romani language being used in schools. And one of the key people working on that in Shutka at that time was Shaip Yusuf, as we called him, Professor Shaip Yusuf. I've got on my shelf his grammar that he wrote, the first grammar written in Macedonia for possible use as a step towards Romani in schools. And I believe in Shutka now, Romani is in the school, at least as a secondary language. So those were the different streams and ambitions and ways we wanted to work along. A lot has been left to be done to your generation.
Do you believe that the Congress itself was successful?
Very successful in a symbolic way, because now our flag is very much recognized, and we expect on April the 8th that the European Union will have a meeting and pay respect to us. But of course, they're going to make that big mistake of calling the International Roma Day, but at least they are exposing our flag and paying respect in that way. Yes, I think it was very important symbolically. Times were still difficult. The name Rom, okay, we threw out the word gypsy, Cigan no longer, Zigoina no thank you, and we had Roma. But unfortunately, I see in the British press that you've got Roma migrants, and tens of thousands of people are facing deportation following Brexit. And they're using Roma almost in the same way and with the same derogatory feeling around it as was gypsy. So in a way, it's difficult to change things unless, we have to fight a bit harder to get real change taking place. We're often fighting for things happening in the media, but we still see things happening in the Mahala where there is no road. The housing is legal or not legal, and people can come and knock down the houses without anything happening, and things are pretty bad, very bad indeed. In fact, it's a crisis. I became an activist in a kind of different way because it was a matter of survival. But you people who are coming up through university, it's a very different situation. And I have to say, I hope that you will take inspiration from the first Congress, from what earlier activists did, and help your own communities in the way that there needs to be help. In other words, leadership. There was a meeting this morning of the Jubilee Committee making plans for the Congress, and we were saying there are a lot of young people now have been trained. We've seen lots of training sessions and many, many conferences. We need now to move to action where young fellows who are ready for it can go back to the villages, go back to the Mahala and look at those very down-to-earth problems, the problems of statelessness, problems where people can't get the social benefits they need. Maybe they can't get to the doctor. Maybe there isn't a proper road into the village. All those issues. And believe me, because of my experience, with the help, with the inspiration of a person like yourself, any one of you, people will come together very quickly and fight, very much so. People will fight for their rights once they're given a little bit of support and a little bit of encouragement from people who've already got it in their heads that, hey, there's a United Nations Charter of Human Rights. We've got all kinds of charters and promises and pieces of paper that say we have rights. But hey, where are those rights? And it's up to you folk to organize your communities and fight at ground level for those issues which are so blatantly obvious to us. We all know what the problems are, but where is the solution? And I'm hoping that this Jubilee Congress that we're having now, which is open to everybody and is stretched over a month, so there's a lot of time to discuss, a lot of time to think how best we could restructure ourselves in an effective way. Because amazingly, whereas for the first Congress, we only had 10 organizations to call upon to bring together, there are now hundreds, maybe there's 1,000 small and large NGOs and organizations, and yet we're not so effective. We really have not been able to get a political voice which would be appropriate for the numbers. The 10 million Roma in Europe should have a strong voice. In fact, that's another thing I get quite upset about, because I still see that Roma are referred to as a minority, even as an ethnicity, whereas we are quite a middle-sized nationality.
You have very nicely brought up the NGOization of the Romani movement and how this huge number of NGOs does not necessarily mean that a lot has been achieved. Now we go to Maria.
Yes, thank you, Nadja. Were there any internal divisions among the participants of the Congress?
Yes, of course there were things that we had to smooth out. And I suppose the biggest issue, but first of all, there was a personality thing, because Dr. Jan Cibula, after I'd met him in 1968, had managed to leave Czechoslovakia and live in Switzerland. So at that time, he was regarded, of course, by the socialist authorities as somebody who'd kind of, left under a bad atmosphere. And when Toma Holomek came and the others came, there was a difference between them, those who had come with official permission of the Czechoslovak government, and Dr. Jan Cibula, who was in effect an emigre, and they met together, and it took, a while. I suppose they were talking in the dormitory through the night, but they got together again. But that was one of the kind of differences, political differences. One of the main difficulties is regarding where the Roma were going. The thing was, the people who came from Eastern Europe, and this might be true even today, were saying, look, the great aim must be integration. Those people who are out on the road in caravans, this is a very bad way of life. You people better give up your caravans and get into houses and get jobs. And people from the gypsy counties say, wait a minute, we've been on the road for 1,000 years. This is our way of life. We're independent. We don't want to live in houses. And that's a very strong feeling today. And the strange thing is, the irony of history, if you like, is, of course, in recent years, with the EU and the development of free travel and the very bad things that have happened since the 1980s through to 1990s, when somehow there was this rise of racism, and many people have been forced to leave homes in Romania and Bulgaria and Serbia, Yugoslavia, and go on the road, have been forced on the road, hoping to come to Germany and so on, and Belgium, but have been stuck on the road in caravans and living in those small shacks. And it's become, if you like, to put it that way, a kind of gypsyization of people who are Roma and who were living in their mahala and who are beginning to get a better life, but suddenly thrown back on the road because of this bad racism that's come up, and as we call it, Tsiganism, anti-Tsiganism. So there might be 1 million people probably on the road today. So again, we ask ourselves, what is the way of life? There is an ancient collision between nomadic peoples and people who live in houses. And I personally, in this time of crisis now, when the whole planet is in a pretty bad way, I think we need to stick to our old ways, and that they have great value. And maybe the Roma have something to teach the Gagé about survival and about a way of life which does nobody else any harm, and that we serve a purpose with the different trades going around in caravans. And allow us to keep doing that. But just yesterday, I was hearing, all about Dale Farm and the battle we had there. Another camp near to Dale Farm, there are 11 people being told they will go to prison if by next Wednesday, and I'm talking about next Wednesday now, they don't get off their land, go back in their caravans and start traveling again, they're going to go to prison from 4 to 8 months because they never had planning permission to live on that piece of land. And that's the kind of situation we're facing here. So we're still facing the old battle of the right to travel and the right to a way of life, which has a lot of value to it.
And also, I think it's important to mention that some of the Roma people are not necessarily connected to the nomadic living, but then when they actually want to get jobs and they want to participate in different kind of jobs offered by the mainstream, that they are limited to certain jobs. And that's why many people feel hopelessness and they are not sure how they can actually contribute. Because if you are Roma and you want to obtain a job, usually you can only obtain certain kinds of jobs which the non-Roma do not want to do, such as cleaning the streets or, as it was in the past, mining. So it also brings a lot of hopelessness for the Roma, even when they want to be more included in the society. Maria, do you have any other questions? I think there were more questions related to the relations within the movement.
Yes. The following question is, what tactics did you use to ensure the group cohesion?
It's not really a question that I feel that I can respond much to. We sat around a table. It was a library with books on the shelves. Language was a very, very strong thing. The different dialects coming together, people feeling their way through understanding to each other. And of course, the preparations of the Congress had created an atmosphere where we needed to come together, and we needed to create those symbols that would go forward from that Congress. I often say that the First World Congress had the easiest task because we had just a blank paper. We could so easily say, right, we don't want to be called gypsies anymore. Call us Roma. That was easy. We had the flag and we had some discussion and we came up with the red wheel and we sung Jelem together. Singing that anthem for the first time together was a really great thing, and it brought us close together. And when we went, of course, to protest at the police station over the children's deaths, all these things brought us together. So I can't say there was any particular tactics bring us together, but it was a kind of a natural process that brought us close. I would say one of the unfortunate things was that when the Congress broke up and everybody had to go back to their countries, it wasn't so easy to communicate anymore. I went off to Furtună, and then I was living in Greece for a number of years, but everything was quite slow, And it was 7 years before we could organize a second Congress in Geneva in 1978. Things moved very slowly in those days. This time, with your generation, things are moving very quickly, and perhaps they need to move quickly.
My last question now is, who are the main supporters of the Congress?
We didn't have any supporters, believe it or not. We sincerely had no supporters. In fact, the people in the village, which is Charlesford, had collected £4,000, which was quite a lot of money in those days, because they wanted to get rid of gypsies. A lot of families were living along a roadside, the A20, just down in Kent, and they were facing eviction just like as I had in Ireland. The police were coming around every day. There was nobody supporting us. It is believed by some people that the Indian government supported the first Congress. I'm sorry to say they did not. There was no support, and it was done really without any funding. And as I said, we're very lucky to have got the school, so we didn't have any costs there. And the only cost of any size was hiring a bus to go up to Birmingham, and I paid for that bus. We had a lot of opposition. In fact, we had to keep the the location of the Congress secret from the press. Didn't tell anybody that the Congress was taking place until it had started.
So now we come to the segment related more to the contemporary issues. And Gianni, who kind of has living experiences related to persecution and who has written about it also, could maybe give us an introduction and ask some of the questions related to this topic.
Yes, thank you, Nadja. You brought up to our attention the issue of Kosovo and how more than 100,000 of Roma had to flee Kosovo due to the war conditions back there. So I know that you started to work and started to think about this question. So can you please tell more about your work relating to this issue and what can we expect in the future?
Kosovo in 1998-9 was a place where something happened that I would say was only secondly bad, only second to the Holocaust. Because something we hear that 130,000 Roma were forced, ethnically cleansed from Kosovo, hundreds were killed, many disappeared, 14,000 homes were burnt and then appropriated, the properties appropriated, and nobody wants to hear about it. And there is a very good reason why they don't want to hear, because when NATO bombed Kosovo and Serbia, some of the soldiers, and we have this evidence from one particular French soldier, soldiers of NATO, of the KFOR force, were alongside the paramilitaries who went systematically from one Roma house to another through all the towns and villages and forced people out and made them give up their homes and allowed other people to occupy those homes. If we obtain that voice that we need to obtain, a political level of expressing ourselves, it should be possible to bring some recognition to what happened in that period. First of all, recognition, and then even the possibility of bringing legal action that would result in a case of crimes against humanity that occurred in those 2 years. My connection with Kosovo goes back quite a long way, back to the 1970s. And I had moved to Niš. And you may know that Site Balic, who was a later president of the World Romani Congress, was working on putting together all Yugoslav Union, if you like, the Savez Roma Yugoslavia. And he was able to organize a smotra, a festival in Pristina. And I went down there with my wife because she was dancing with the Pralipe. And we, amazingly, when we look back on it, we had a complete cross-table discussion, and not a friendly one, I can tell you, with the leaders of Kosovo, the Albanian Communist Party people at that time. And I was sitting there as the General Secretary of the World Romani Congress, and next to me was Site Balic. And he put the point that can there be a Savez, a Roma Savez in Kosovo that will be affiliated to this new idea of the Savez Roma Yugoslavia? And the plain answer was given, no, we don't want you to do that and we won't allow you to do that. But when those officials went off for their lunch and we were still sitting there with a sandwich and a cup of coffee, we said, we're going to do it anyway. And we did. We did. What the outcome of that, I can't tell you was, but we definitely decided we were going to go do the thing that we wanted to do and really express our right to associate and to come together in the way that we wanted to do it. And so what I hope will happen through this Congress now, the Jubilee Congress, is that we will go back to Pristina on the 13th of June. We will commemorate what happened, even if it's only in a small way, and that is by having a plaque on a private house where people died. On the 14th of June, hopefully, and I'm always hopeful, that we will have again such a meeting with the Albanian authorities of today. And I believe they're quite vulnerable, if I may say so, because there is the trial going on in The Hague, so that if at this very moment we can get ourselves together and show that we are a nation of 10 million, and we are coming down to little Kosovo, and we are asking for your respect, and we are asking you to recognize and see what happened in those years, 1998, 99. Now, whether that leads eventually to people wanting to go back to Kosovo, that's an individual decision by many people, but at least we should have a recognition and a respect, and that would be a new starting point. And I hope we can achieve that, and I hope that Serjan, you better be part of that solution. It proves to be a solution.
I hope. I'm looking really forward to it. I'm really looking forward to it. And I just had one more question. You started in 1971 officially, let's say, the wheel of integration when it comes to Roma community. So what do you see, what should we, the new generations, now start to think about? How we should continue the fight for being treated as human beings and having all the rights as the others? What would be your kind of message for us, Mr. Buxton?
Thank you. It's a terrific question. In fact, I was, of course, active right back in 1962. So, you know, it's nearly 60 years. Well, one of the things I look at, one of the weaknesses, so perhaps it's about getting over some of the weaknesses that exist. And one of those weaknesses is that, as somebody said earlier in this discussion, that we have representatives, but they are in position because they've been appointed. They are appointed from the top, let's say by the EU or by the OSCE or by any government who wants to have a Roma specialist in their ranks so they can pretend they're doing something very positive and good. So how do we fill the gap? How do we have it so that we have representatives who are elected, who have a mandate, who have real legitimacy from the communities that they represent, or say they represent? Because I'm not saying they're bad people. We have some very good people who definitely have their heart in the job, but they are in a weak position themselves because they do not have that mandate from the people. So that was why about 5 years ago, we started this thing called the democratic transition, because saying, look, the technology we have today makes it possible to set up our own election system, whereby through an electronic voting system, every Rom around the world could have a vote and decide who their leadership should be in a normal democratic way. Why can't we do this? So I don't think that we're quite ready for it during this Jubilee Congress, but I think we will try out that new kind of democracy. And one of the ways we'll do this is through having what you call referenda. Like if we have an issue on, there is a resolution, for instance, that'll come before the Congress saying that the 13th of June shall be always remembered every year now as the commemoration of what happened in Kosovo. And we can put that to a referendum. And we've got quite a lot of people lined up to take part in that. And I hope the Congress will create more interest and more people coming into that. So referendum might be the start of it. And we could at least get a team of people together to keep this democratic transition process and build on it until maybe next Congress we have 50,000, and the Congress after that we have 100,000. And in the end, why don't we have 1 million or 2 million voters? And if we reach that point, I am convinced, I'm convinced one thing, I won't be here, I'm sorry to say, but I'm convinced that the people in political positions in the Romani movement will have great respect, and we will be able to wield the political voice and power, which you are entitled to do simply through your numbers. And if I'm talking of the future, why, it won't be long if we have our 100th commemoration, our centenary, there will be 40 million Roma around the world, 20 million in Europe and 40 million Roma around the world. That will be some nation. And if by that point we have our own elective system, we won't only be wielding political power that is appropriate to us, but I think we will be leading the world and showing that a people who have no land, who have not got, who don't want borders, who want to see the end of geographical borders, we will be a very progressive element in the world, showing how to survive and how to have a true democracy and how to be progressive and humane.
I think we should also have here a bit the Roma language. If you have some message, if you want to something to say, Romanes.
Amen sama kate is the slogan of the Congress. We are here and we will not be moved. That was what we would say back in Ireland. We used to say, na jas amen, we are not going. But now we have to say, amen jas anglais, we are going forward. It's a very different situation. There is one other thing I'd like to bring up about this Jubilee Congress, and it's not something created by the Congress, but it's an issue that very much involves everybody, and that is the plan by German railways and the state of Berlin, as I understand, to undermine the one most important of our Holocaust memorials in the middle of Berlin. And they want to dig a hole right beside it, which is going to cause a lot of disruption to that memorial. And I believe that we all have to oppose that and be ready to say no to German railways, to say that there is a solution, there is one route where they want to put this small connecting railway. It can go on a different route, which would not disturb railway. And I think we have to, I believe and I urge that we put down a strong statement that we will not be moved from that place. So that's my kind of ending. But of course, I also want to say to Taventumen Bachtale, the Penav Bacht Zor Taisastipe.
Šukaras Pankeras. No, tavan so. Tavan sasto.
Thank you, Mr. Puxon, for sharing your insights with us. And thank you to all of my colleagues asking questions and those making this work from the technical side. But also we need to mention that this interview would not be possible without the generous help of the Romani Studies Department. And we are very grateful to the academic director, Miss Angéla Kóczé, as well as to our coordinator, Martin Rovid. We hope that this interview conversation that we had will help the new generations of activists, that it will bring information for those interested in what this Congress was about and what is its legacy. At the end, I would like to say that there is no such thing as a perfect activist nor a perfect movement. What matters is that we do things with compassion, and that we always manage to see a piece of us in someone else. Until another conversation, Opre Roma.
All right. God bless her.
Hello everyone. Thank you all for joining our today's event from the series of events devoted to 50 years of the First World Roma Congress. Today we've come together for a roundtable under the title Romani History, Self-Determination, and the Use of Oral History and Digital Technologies. The questions posed to our speakers are: what are the challenges of writing Roma history? What is the role of oral history here? What are the potentials and limitations of digital technologies to preserve Romani collective memories? And every speaker will address those questions during 10 minutes. Then we'll have about 20 minutes for a Q&A session. I'm the moderator. My name is Iurii Rudnev. I've been teaching history for the Roma Graduate Preparation Program at CU during the last 4 years. This year, I'm doing that in the framework of the Princeton Global History Lab. It's my pleasure to note that the idea of our round table originates from Roma students' participation in the oral history course provided by our partnership with the Global History Lab. Its director, Professor Adelman, will speak the second. As you could see from Grattan Puxon interview, our oral history classes bear a good fruit. But now let's welcome our first speaker, Agnes Darochi. She is a cultural manager, reciter, journalist and minority researcher, as well as the director of the Romano Instituto Foundation, established in 2010 to urge the creation of other Roma institutions and to promote mutual acceptance and inclusion of the Roma with the instruments of science, research and public discussion. Ágnes has worked to defend the rights of the Hungarian Roma, engaging in various activities from supporting Roma victims of right-wing violence to establishing Roma cultural institutions and documenting and archiving the history of the Roma people. Ágnes, the floor is yours.
Probably so. Thank you very much. Tavem saste hai bachtale. Janevari con romanes, mascartu mende? Okay, just my do it.
Tavem saste tu.
Nice. Tu mensa ketane. The Roma have no history. They have only story. They have very, very long, very much, and very different stories. Why, you can ask, such a big sentence? As El Said in his book Orientalism wrote, nowadays, and of course in last centuries, probably the very last one, there are histories, not only the so-called big nations history, the king's histories and government's histories, but it was born also the minorities, the different and smaller groups' histories. Between them also the Romas. Why? Why I am telling you that we do not have history, we have only stories. Because, and this is very important, to have a common history, it means to make agreements about that issue. So the question is when, how to collect all those researchers, I don't know, media men and so on, to make this agreement about our own history. Károly Bari wrote in his essay about Romani folklore, our costumes hold us. Not the opposite. It was not a bad citation. Our costumes hold us. And this is what we have to bear in mind. In our life, we can say that the generation of our parents mainly were illiterate. Less than one generation, and so big challenges and so big exchanges happened in our life. Are we able to follow them? And the questions goes forward. How is it possible that the persecution during the Nazi time lost in the air? Only after 70, 60 years now, as a new Romani intelligentsia was born, we began to collect these oral histories, to search, to research collectively, and to write those personal stories to have a collective history. Even though this time and period of persecution is very, very important in our real history, I want to push a point which is very often in the mouth of our activists, that we are and we were always persecuted. This is a very bad method. This is about we are a nation of losers. And what would we like to teach to the next generation? Just the opposite. We are not a nation of losers. We are not. And why? That can you learn from your own family history. And I will send you also in this chat a small citation of our essay written by me and by my husband about the planning of a new identity. What can we learn from our ancestors? Why is it unbelievably important to learn from the past and to give it to the next generation? If we are not the loser, which are those mangin, sarpenes, gajikanes, values, what we have to learn from our past? One of those is, and this is what I want to push, the absolute modern knowledge what our ancestors had as they arrived to Europe. Let's say they knew how to use the gunfires, how to build not only castles, but bastei and so on, which was very, very important in wars. And all the other knowledges, they knew different languages, they were absolutely good personal connections binder. All those you as next generation have to learn. And how is it possible if we will somewhere, sometimes in the future make this agreement? This can remain between us and can be forgotten. The first one is very important, the use of modern technology to share the information. Not first of all the Facebook, what I am thinking about. But different pages, unfortunately, and very often, instead of publications, of real Roma publications, because we do not have them. The books are the part of the written knowledges. And unfortunately, until today, we are not the nation of the written, but we are very strong in oral culture. And these new technologies can help us to share, which can help us. One more point, the art. Art, because to give our truth into the hands of the majority can make a gap, as they aren't able to understand the so-called otherness. But the art, and it can be different, very different type of arts, can bring such a tapintható, azt hogy mondják? Touchable sameness, to see the Roma as the gadget themselves, on the base of érzés. Rövid, Marci, segítsél! Emotions. Csak eszembe jutott. Emotions. And this can make a field, and this can be the hub of understanding, and this can be the tool that they can feel not only the otherness, but the sameness too. Thank you. I do not want now to tell you other, but probably later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. That's perfect timing and great speech. Thank you. Our next speaker is Jeremy Adelman. He's currently the Henry Charles Lee Professor of History and the director of the Global History Lab at Princeton University that provides this year the history courses for the RGPP students. As a true global historian, Jeremy has lived and worked in 7 countries and 4 continents. His recent books include Worlds Together, Worlds Apart, A History of Humankind from the Beginning to the Present, and forthcoming Earth Hunger, Global Integration and the Need for Strangers. The floor is yours, Jeremy.
Thank you, Iurii. Am I coming through okay? Okay, great. It's really an honor and a pleasure and a great learning experience for me to be with you. I really want to start just by expressing my gratitude to all of the my Roma colleagues and co-collaborators every Friday morning in a discussion that we have in the context of the lab, how much I learned from those conversations, and to Iurii for facilitating them. I'm as aware, if not more than everybody else on the screen, how limited my knowledge is about Roma history, and I'm not even going to pretend to offer any insights about the Roma experience per se. Iurii thought that what I might be able to provide, though, are some insights from, let's say, some adjacent sides of the history discipline on framing some of the discussions that are happening. I'll mention two, and then perhaps comment on points that were raised by Mr. Puxon and Agnes in her the comments, the wonderful comments she just made here. So first, just on global history and the connection that came up earlier in the presentation about the struggles of Roma people as a model for thinking about a new form of global politics is, I think, really an interesting way of framing this. But what are the challenges of global history for thinking about how that might work? One is the problem of what we call scale. That is, how do we connect local experiences of particular peoples and places with global processes that don't just turn particular or local experiences into the detail for something that is more general. And vice versa, how do we overcome the problem that represents the global as more than just the context in which something particular unfolds? And I'll get into how that happens in just a moment when I think about the discussion that happened an hour ago involving Nadja and others in thinking about the idea and the practice of self-determination, that the Roma have a particular experience of what that language and that politics means, that is at the same time particular and yet reflects back on the problem of global self-determination, particularly around the question of the state and sovereignty. I'll come back to that in just a minute. The second one is about oral history. So Iurii had asked me, what would oral history have to offer? Well, I think what is remarkable here is it's a research method that has been developed in many countries and people around the world to capture personal experiences that are not necessarily inscribed in official transcripts, that are often embedded in state archives, which is obviously a challenge for creating a collective history, or what might be called a story of peoplehood for the Roma people. So there's that side of it. It's a research strategy for recovering voices and experiences, but in your case, and this came up just a minute ago, it is also the subject itself. And why that is that the oral tradition is a mode of communication and transmission across place and across generations of a collective experience that in fact becomes collectivized through oral transmission. And that's really important to underscore here, because the traditional ways in which around the world, and this is the limits of global history, people tell the story of nationalism is around what's called print capitalism. That is the sharing of common iconographies through the transmission of modern quote unquote communications, particularly of books and pamphlets and newspapers, to create a shared identity beyond the local that then becomes the patriotic framework or the nation. And it's through the engineering of print capitalism that we get the origins of nationalism. This is a theory most identified with Benedict Anderson. Well, what happens when it's the oral tradition that it becomes the foundation for this? So that's why thinking about oral history is not just a research method. It's actually the subject for thinking about alternative trajectories for creating shared memories and horizontal comradeship. And there are other examples where this happens. I think in particular, so I'm speaking from I'm not American, but I'm speaking from the United States, where African-American traditions of oral culture around music and so on has been very important for rethinking the engineering of nationalism beyond just the traditional emphasis on written and textual sources. So a story without a history, as Agnes said. So I have just a couple of, I'll end with a few examples that I heard in the discussion earlier, where I think these dual issues around thinking beyond the problem of scale of particular versus universal histories, particularly in the struggle to try to create a narrative, or what kind of narrative, especially beyond a narrative as I understand it, of let's say loserhood or persecution, and then the question of sovereignty. So of course there is a global context for all of this, as we heard. By the 1960s, the language of self-determination and the idea of creating rights for people who don't have rights ripens in the United States, very closely aligned with civil rights, where I grew up in Canada, for French Canadian people associated with Quebecois nationalism, and the idea of a nation inside a nation that was being denied rights. And so the debate unfolds, and you could hear it in the earlier discussion around what is the best way to get rights, to integrate or to separate. Right? And that becomes the defining debate for many people in that generation of struggle from the 60s through the 1970s. And the question might be, how much did that frame with what are called in the social sciences path-dependent consequences for the Roma people? So there's a global dimension to this. The difference, of course, for comparing Quebecois or African Americans is, of course, and this came up earlier, is the issue around borders and, let's say, the multinational nature of the Roma nation in coming into being, and the paradoxes that produces. Integrate into what then becomes the question. And I think there's a really interesting set of conversations to be had, and I think it was in response to Nadia's last question, this issue about what does this mean for the future, for global thinking across borders, is where the Roma experience about thinking about solidarity in a more global fashion might be a really powerful example for everybody else, as we can now see in the midst of, with the compounding the pandemic, is of course the spread of vaccine nationalism. So how to think about rights beyond and across borders. So that's one bundle of issues. The other one is around memory and sovereignty. I think in this comes to the oral history issue. In a world, and this came up production earlier for the videos of a world of states, a world that's carved up into states, and whereas Hannah Arendt noted, the only way to have rights is to have membership in a state, to be a citizen, required being a member of a state. Well, what happens to people who aren't members of states or who disidentify with those states? It creates a question around memory, and particularly when those states become hostile agents for those people. And this is clearly a central issue in, let's say, in the issue about building up collective memories through oral history. And I think it cuts across from thinking about the Holocaust for Roma people all the way to the issue right now, as came up in the end of the discussion about an hour ago, was the question of Roma migrants being stigmatized. And I think this becomes then a challenge for thinking about peoplehood beyond the persecuted, right? And so what become other ways to think about shared memory? And I thought, and if I could, Iurii, just have a second to go back to the starting videos, which were wonderful. The place of the flags, the place of the music, the place of thinking about creativity is one way around this. The production of shared rituals, meanings, the challenging of them even, creates a sense of internal but pluralistic belonging. So there is something shared. And then at the same time, because this came up, I think in Maria's questions in particular, which were really interesting, sort of pushing at the edge internal differences and discord and disagreement among Roma people about their identities, their modes of organizing, solidarities, and so forth. So I think once you begin to turn towards this idea of a plenitude of people inside a nation without a state, then you start to get into these issues of what is shared, what is disputed. And I think that's where the oral history methodologies can really draw some attention to those debates that are obviously very specific to Roma people, but you can see them playing them out in different ways, in other settings in which the struggle for citizenship, or for rights anyway, is unfolding. So thanks once again for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the discussion and for continuing my note-taking. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Let me just remind our listeners that we have you have a chance to ask questions using this Q&A form or on Facebook. Meanwhile, our next speaker is Adrian-Nicolae Furtună, who is the director of the Cultural and Social Research Center Romane Rodimata and the counselor of the Research and Documentation Department of the National Center for Roma Culture. Adrian-Nicolae has published a number of research papers on Roma slavery and Roma Holocaust in Romania, including The Roma in Romania and the Holocaust History, Theory, Culture, Roma Slavery in Wallachia, Fragments of Social History. In 2020, he curated the exhibition 164 Years Since the Abolition of Roma Slavery, Oral Maps from Today, a project of social memory. Adrian-Nicolae, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. And also, I feel to say some words in Romani language for our listeners. Nai sarau tu menge ke Adelman ande adekha mândro conferenția. Hai dacă situt men fucimata ajucărastu menge. So I will start with the first question. What are the challenges of writing Roma history? And I will make reference to my work. So for me, the challenge was to deconstruct, I would say, the Roma history in Romania that it was written until now. So I'm referring also to the Holocaust but also to the Roma slavery. Since 2007, when I started to collect interviews with the Roma survivors of the deportation to Transnistria, I faced the problem that in the Romanian historiography, the deportation of the Roma was labeled that was made on social criteria and not on racial criteria, for example. Why I'm saying this? Because this idea or paradigm that was largely presumed by the historians in Romania also influences the social memory of the Roma Holocaust in Romania, for example. I want to say that accompanying in different events of commemoration of the Holocaust, accompanying the Roma survivors, sometimes I I had the feeling, the sensation that they are treated by the others like being survivors of second-hand category. And why I'm saying this? Because in the archive documents, the deportation of the Roma from Romania to Transnistria, it's justified on the fact that Roma were considered like thieves, criminals, people useless for the society. So why I said that one of the challenges is to deconstruct in a way what was written until now. Even the word, I think, is very big. But in the main works written in Romania about the Roma Holocaust, the term of asocials that were considered the Roma also shaped the way in which the Roma on a part and also the Romanians are remembering the Roma deportation to Transnistria. And also I want to share with you that last year I had the chance to, it is the right word to say, an archive document that I published last year, the book. Now it's in Romanian, but this year it will appear in English, and it's a book about the deportation to Transnistria of the families of the Roma soldiers. So here I found an archive document that is coming from a prefecture and a prefect from the county Brașov. He is asking the central authorities if the ethnic origin of Țigan is officially recognized and which category of inhabitants are considered gypsies. So why I'm saying this? Because now easily I will pass to the second question. What is the role of oral history? I consider this document very important because it makes the link between the historical fact, the deportation of the Roma, and the way in which the Roma interpreted and understood what happened with them during the deportation. So when I was on the field, I had the chance to make like more than 50 interviews with the Roma survivors. So when I put this question, why you were deported? The historiography, the archive documents responded to this question in this manner. They were deported because they were thieves, they were criminals, they had a criminal file, etc. But when we are asking the survivors why you have been deported, why you have been deported, they respond because we were Roma. So I think the role of the oral history is to give us an understanding, a larger understanding of the facts in a way, but also, I mean, every from us, we know that often the testimonies of the survivors, they are not very, how to say, considered like being real documents for the historians, but asking them these things and receiving from them this information, we understand today the way in which they understood the deportation, but also we have a testimony that comes, and it's, I can say that today we have the puzzle. I mean, we have the archive document. From what I know from the historiography of Romania, this is the only document that puts the deportation of the Roma on racial discussion, and also we have the testimony from the survivors. Also, I think that the role of the oral history, it's important in order to understand how the Roma filtered the historical events that they lived from the perspective of their own culture. And I'm meaning now to the mnemonics that I had the possibility to find on the field. I'm referring to some poems, short poems, short songs, but the most important things for me, like sociologist, there are two myths, the myth of the savior queen and the myth of the cardboard boats. If we don't have time now to, but I found the fact that Roma understand their own history. For example, when we speak about Roma Holocaust in Romania, also using mnemonics that are linking their history with the history of the Jewish people. The myth of the cardboard boat says that some survivors, they say, they say, oh, you are referring to that moment when Antonescu put them or us in cardboard boats and let us to float on the sea and to be sunk. And from what I researched, I saw that this myth is coming from the fact that with 6 months before the deportation of the Roma, a ship called Struma with almost 800 Jewish people on board was sank on in the Bosphorus. So the Roma took this real event and they transformed it to their own culture. Another myth is the myth of the savior queen. So according to this idea, the queen mother Elena came in Transnistria and saved the Roma. What I want to say is that it is needed to study the oral history, because it gives us the possibility to understand the cultural trauma, but also I consider oral history like a tool that it's coming in the help of the archive document in order to have an entire piece of the Roma history. So I have like 30 seconds. No, okay, I will finish. So what I want to say is that the main challenge in writing Roma history, it's confronting the colonialist in a part and the paternalistic way in which the Roma history was written until now. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian-Nicolae, for this fascinating talk. And now our last speaker, Ioanida Costache, who is a PhD candidate in ethnomusicology at Stanford University, and she is visiting fellow at the Mendel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Her research explores issues of race and ethnicity, performance, construction of identity, affect, cultural memory, trauma, and history as they intersect in Romani musical oral traditions of Romania. Ioanida, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Iurii, for the introduction. And thank you so much to the students at CEU for the invitation. I'm really honored to participate alongside this distinguished panel, especially in the context of this historic year, commemorating 50 years since the 1971 World Roma Congress. So thank you very much. I think much of what I'll say has already been touched upon by my colleagues. I might add some nuances to a lot of great things that have already been said. Recently, a few days ago, I just published a piece as part of a roundtable I curated on Black Lives Matter and Roma rights in Europe now. So I will drop this, the link in the chat, and then maybe somebody can post it on the Facebook too. My contribution to this roundtable was called Subjects of Racialized Modernity, Romani People and Decoloniality in Europe. And the kind of basic argument of the piece was that we need to do kind of a better job of integrating Romani history into current academic, but also public discussions around decoloniality. So one of the challenges that I see in writing Romani history are the frames that we use to present that history. And so this is something that a lot of my colleagues in Romani studies are already doing. So I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but some treatments of Roma still do adhere to these kind of dated anthropological research methods. And this is also related to what Nico was just saying. You know, there are still these treatments of Roma that adhere to these methods that kind of were described and criticized by Michel Touillot when he theorized this concept of the savage slot, right? This the savage slot, which anthropology invented in order to distinguish, you know, the savage from the West, and in doing so, simultaneously creates the West. And this is also the kind of argument that Said is making, with which Agnes brought up. And I think this relates to a point that Nico is making as well. Adrian is making about the need to deconstruct these kind of inaccurate historical narratives, which have implications on contemporary lives of Roma, right? So when this historical narrative exists that Roma were deported to Transnistria because they were nomadic, because of behavior, not because of race, that creates an internal hierarchization in the Roma community, in their understanding of self, which is really detrimental, right? That to kind of the solidarity of the group as a whole. And that is something that, as I'm sure Nico, you know, Nico has already mentioned, that we see today. And that's really problematic. So that's definitely one of the challenges. Yeah, the main challenge that I wanted to talk about was this idea that often the kind of history of Romani persecution is relegated to the peripheries of mainstream or hegemonic history. And this is what Chakrabarti would call history one, these hegemonic historical narratives. Roma, who are often painted as these primitive, unintegrated into modern society, as really antithetical to modernity itself. They're painted as this kind of backward people. That means that Roma people in history remain unincorporated into these global discussions of coloniality and of white supremacy. And we saw this very much, and this is kind of what what instigated the roundtable, we saw that Roma really weren't being incorporated into these global reckonings after Black Lives Matter. And I think it's partly because of this, this problematic way that Roma history has been relegated really to the margins. But as you know, Walter Mignolo states, coloniality, you know, quote, is constitutive, right, and not derivative of modernity. So there is no modernity without coloniality. And this is why he uses this modernity coloniality framework. So in that case, Roma, you know, as people, as modern subjects are by default modern colonial subjects, since there is no outside of the colonial matrix of power. Therefore, the subjugation of Roma should really be considered as part of the coloniality that kind of permeates our everyday life. These things influence the ideas and ideologies of race that circulated and continued to circulate. These things drive political and economic processes, both historically and in the contemporary moment. So Roma should need to be folded into these discourses and processes of reckoning with colonialism and white supremacy, and not simply in order to advance the mobilization of Roma rights, but also to better understand European ideologies of race and racism. So that's one point about just kind of the frames through which we narrate history. To address more specifically the question of oral history, I think Chakrabarti and Foucault are actually quite helpful here too. So Chakrabarti is telling us that we have history 1 and we have history 2. History 1 is hegemonic history, it's written history, it's penned from the dominant perspective, whereas history 2 might be what Spivak calls the subaltern or Foucault calls counter histories, ideas which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So this dynamic between history 1 and 2 is interesting. And in some way, I think maps onto the dichotomy that theorists have set up between the archive and the repertoire, which is something that's come up in our discussion already between the oral and the written, to put it very simplistically. So this repertoire, which consists of oral and embodied memory, song, dance, theater, art, rituals, even like cooking is something that Diana Taylor includes in that list. These are challenges, right, to the hegemony of the archive, that set of written or preserved materials. And the incorporating of history 2 or this repertoire into history 1 poses certain challenges, methodological, of course, but also what I'd like to focus on are ethical ones. And so this ushers in this point of epistemic extractivism, which is a term coined by Grisvogel to describe the cognitive or intellectual extraction of knowledge into, so maybe the extraction of history 2 into history 1. Right, of these repertoires of oral knowledge into like written or hegemonic knowledge production. Again, Chakrabarti deals with similar issues in his description of history 1, which constitutes a historical narrative of modernity and rationality that adheres to capitalist logics. And history 2 is marked by alterity and subalternity. So importantly, and I think this is also what Adrian was saying at the end of his contribution, that these alternatives to hegemonic histories, right? This need to deconstruct the hegemonic history with the integration of oral forms of oral histories and songs and other things like that. It's not that one should eclipse the other, but perhaps that like in tandem, these two things would create a fuller picture of a fuller and more accurate picture of the stories of the past that eventually become history. So this dichotomy, I was just thinking when listening to Jeremy talking, this dichotomy between the oral and the written becomes really messy now in the digital age. So when technology gives new forms of orality that can be recorded and disseminated, right? So now instead of the printing press, right, that Anderson talks about, and that being this way of creating the nation through the transmission of these written documents, now we have podcasts and social media, and we have Instagram accounts. And those are the primary ways in which information circulate rather than, you know, that printing press. So it brings up this question for me about what does it mean when we can access history, oral history and song, no longer just through oral transmission, but also through these digital means. It looks like my time is up, so I will end there and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Ioanida. And let's thank our speakers for their insightful presentations. Now we have some time for questions, I guess about 8 minutes. And well, I have my own questions, but I won't ask them because we are kind of, the time is not very generous to us. And Agnes wants to say something. I guess, well, do we have any question before I pass the word to Agnes? Okay, no. So Agnes.
I want to strengthen one more point. Please never forget that we have double identity, minimum double, or even a triple identity, which means that we belong to the majority and we love our home countries too. And it's very relative when we are Roma. Yes, because the national identity, it's not always the most important thing in the life. Probably it's more important that we are women, or even that we are mothers, let's say. And this is for me very important to strengthen. The other point related to the history. In that majority history, we were also there. And I want to give you only one example. A Roma soldier from 1848 Freedom War. I'm not able to copy it. Whom about we never speak, but who is personality and only now found in the archives. But if you analyze the, let's say, Hungarian history, during the Freedom War, every single battalion has its own Roma music group. Why we do not know about it nowadays? Why it's perished? Why it is not part of our proudness? Our part in Hungarian history, and to teach the majority that we were also there. And this is what we have to teach in the very, very beginning of the school curricula, from the very beginning. Thank you.
Agnes kind of read my mind, because I wanted to ask you a question about how Roma history should be integrated in the curricula of schools and maybe universities. So that's my question, and I guess we have some time for like 1 or 2 answers of our panelists, if they don't mind. Just go ahead. Yes, please, Adrian-Nicolae.
I want to say that in Romania, from last year, the subject of slavery and the subject of Roma Holocaust were introduced in the compulsory curriculum at the 8th grade at the discipline of history. The only problem from my point of view is that they are like case studies. They are not part of the entire lesson, but they are case studies. But in Romania, this thing happened finally last year.
So it's finally happening gradually and slowly. Anybody else want to react, please?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I couldn't get to in my presentation was this idea of kind of the pressure that we put a lot of the time on oral history and memory and songs, and to kind of transmit the history of an entire people, right? Which it can't do. And so one of the kind of arguments that I make in my dissertation on this subject is like, what are the limits really of embodied memory? What are the limits of oral history? What are the limits of, because I started the project thinking of like, how can these musical oral forms serve as counter histories, right? Because there is so little written and there is so, but at the same time, you know, doing fieldwork in Romania, being here, seeing how, you know, it's not enough, and it would never be enough. And so these kinds of initiatives, like, you know, state-sponsored initiatives to have Roma history taught in schools are vitally important, right? Because there needs to be an entire network of things that are contributing to, as again, Adrian is saying, to the deconstruction of not only historical narratives that are inaccurate, but historical narratives and historical curriculum that are lacking severely in this regard. So yeah, I would just add that into the conversation too.
And maybe Jeremy can say a few words and then we wrap up our round table.
Well, I don't want to be the purveyor of the last words here, so I hope there are more comments, but so on the question of how to integrate or connect Roma history to the curriculum and to courses, first I'll just tell a very brief story, which is that as the CEU students know, I co-authored a textbook of world history. I won't go into it except to say that when the section of the book that got to the history of the Holocaust, we ran into issues with reviewers of the book that wanted to single out the Jewish nature of the Holocaust. And I just want to say that integrating Roma history, and this is not particular to Roma, it's of course a wider challenge that we all face, which is when identities are very connected to, and I think Agnes's point about complex identities, and if you're looking for a book, Antoni Appia's latest book on the question of identities is really worth reading. When they are connected to traumas and efforts to exceptionalize traumas, we run into really complicated efforts. So this issue that Iurii raises about integrating Roma history reveals, say, wider challenges around what are shared histories and what are particularized histories, when we make claims that are related to the relationship between a narrative of trauma and the shared memory of people. I'm glad to say that we pushed back on the reviews, and the story of what happened to Roma people was included in the narrative of ethnocide more generally as a result of European fascism, including, and this is where we started the story, the bombing of Ethiopian civilians by Italian troops. And so that these histories get connected more broadly. The last point I would just say, and it's kind of keeps coming up, which is related to how to connect Roma histories, the ways in which Roma history exemplifies a wider global pattern in an effort, as Ioanida has alluded to, thinking beyond these hegemonic forms or hegemonic narratives. And in this particular case, to think about rights and powers beyond state sovereignty. Right, and a new kind of political imaginary, and what sorts of narratives might be created to think beyond and through the nation. So I think the question of integrating Roma narratives is not just to add, quote unquote, Roma voices, but to challenge some of the epistemological foundations of how we tell stories about nation and narration. So I hope those are not the last words.
Thank you, Jeremy. But unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions and discussion. But what we've had is nice and great and thought-provoking. I thank you all again for your ingenious and sparkling thoughts, conversations, and also for thank you our listeners for being present here. And maybe we will see each other again sometimes. So yeah, here I pass the word to the next part of the event. Thank you.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay, sorry.
We can see you and Nadja. Not we're going to share. Yeah, now it's here.
We will want to launch this platform, and this platform is a collective space of preserving the memories related to Samura Dipen or Poraimos, usually known as Roma Holocaust or Roma Genocide. It is a space for sharing collecting the stories of Roma, a space for challenging the existing narratives, and at the same time, jointly learning space. The goal of this platform is to acknowledge that Roma history is a world history. The submitted materials can be of any form, like interviews, poetry, photo, paintings, comics, etc., and must be complemented by some background informations. The aim of this platform is to create an exhibition on memories, including experiences, feelings, reflection of Roma, and serving as an archive of our collective memories. The exhibition, it will held online on 2nd of August to commemorate the 77th anniversary of Roma Genocide. How you can use the platform, you can search romanistudies.omeka.net, or we will share the link of this platform in our social media, and you can easily find it. To the web about this project, what is it about, and the partners, to the guidelines for contribution. You can see step by step how you can contribute in this platform, and you don't have to log in or to have an account in this platform in order to contribute. To the contribute an item is the space where you can contribute. You can choose one of these options and choose the file and fill what is it required. it is very important, the description, to fill this part, because we are interested to know what is your contribution and what is your relation with this photo, for example. And also, I don't want to go one by one because of the time, but you can see and you can feel everything that is required here. You can also add the location of this photo, and what is it important, your name and your email address, because it can happen that for technical issues, the description, it can be uploaded, but the photo cannot. So we can come back to you through the email address and to ask you to send the photo, for example. You are not a robot, so please check in. Also checking publish my contribution on the web, and I agree to terms and conditions. That means you allow us to use your contribution for the final exhibition and finally contribute. You will receive this. Thank you for your contribution, and to the browser items, you can see what are the other contributions, but on the same time, if you click in one of them, you can comment to the contribution of each other. And the last thing, if you have any questions, concerns, or if you face technical problems, just contact us through this space and we will come back to you as soon as possible. This is all, thank you. And maybe Nadja, you want to add something?
So thank you, Klaudia, so much for introducing our platform. We truly hope that you will be able to contribute, or at least later on in August, have a look at the exhibition. Thanks to everyone for joining today. A special thank you to our distinguished panelists and the moderator for bringing us food for thought. And thank you for our colleagues behind the cameras, behind the screens, Marton and Kata, who've done an amazing job. We continue our collective journey of learning and unlearning tomorrow from 3 to 5 p.m. Central European Time by the program prepared by our colleagues of the Roma program at the Harvard University. The title of their program for tomorrow is The Place of Roma in the Global Struggles for Liberation and Anti-Racism. So we kind of already started that conversation today. Happy Roma Day, everyone, and make sure that you join us tomorrow. That will be all. Bye.